Well, hello, 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 everybody. I am your host, Pamela Major, founder of Malia Bloom, MBTV on YouTube, which some of you are probably watching it on there right now. And I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Allison. She is amazing. She is at Stockton University in Galloway, New Jersey. She is the chair of the Africana Studies. And I said Africana Studies. I did not say Black Studies. I said Africana Studies. And we may get into that a little bit tonight. She also, she teaches a class in hip hop. One of my favorite people that I don't know teaches the same at Howard University, Dr. Greg Carr. And I just love the fact that you have that combination. And she just has so much. I mean, her resume, her background, her abilities, you know, like I want to just take her to lunch because I need private time.
Let's do it.
I need private time. I need time to discuss with her. But she is a wife, a mother, an author, a dog lover. I understand that there's a dog involved in our life. And we have the privilege at the Central Jersey Club of being part of this great theme of women telling their stories, right? And women have stories to tell, right? We have stories to tell. And I have the privilege of meeting, this is the first time I'm meeting Dr. Allison, but I love people. So when I meet them, I just love them. And I love hearing stories. And so I'm doing my talking up front because once I ask the question, you know, then we're gonna let the wisdom flow. We're gonna let Dr. Allison just give us some nutrition, right? Just give us some nutrition. The Central Jersey Club is part of the Negro and Business Professional Women's Clubs, and we are committed to uplifting professional women business owners. We are committed to strengthening one another, to being a collective, to being a group of women who bring positive energy to the table so that when we walk away, we all have been fed. And so this interview is part of that. And I'm just super excited to be doing this tonight. I don't even know where the energy comes from. I think just the fact of knowing that I'm going to speak with great people just allows me to just say, hey, it's on. We're getting ready to learn something. We're going to have a one-on-one documentary. And Dr. Allison, would you please, we welcome you, but would you please share some things about you? Because we sure want to know.
Thank you. So I am Donnetrice Allison. I am a full professor at Stockton University. I say that because my understanding is only about 2% of professors around the country are Black women who are full professors. So that is an achievement that I'm proud of, but interestingly, it was not the path that I thought that I was on as an undergraduate. Okay. So I am the youngest of 7, and I'm the only one to do the college thing. So, you know, working class background, everybody got a job and just work that job for years, factory work, all kinds of things. And they all pushed me further. And so, of course, I wouldn't have done any of that without their support. And it was kind of like it became the pride of, okay, well, she's going to kind of do this for all of us. So I started as an undergraduate. I'm from Massachusetts. I went to University of New Haven for undergrad. And I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be, you know, Terry McMillan was hot at the time. I was reading Terry. I was reading Alice Walker. You know, so many of the greats, of course, Toni Morrison, like all of the greats. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to sit at home and write novels and for publishers to send me checks. And I did not find out until I went to Howard University for grad school. That was the only place I applied. It was the only place I wanted to go. I loved school, and I always loved school even from elementary school. I just liked being in the classroom, and I loved school. And I knew after my bachelor's degree, I didn't want to be finished with school. So I applied to go to Howard. And that is when I discovered that if you serve as a TA, they will pay your tuition. And I thought, oh, okay. Let me apply to be
this
a
is
TA.
good.
Let me apply to be a TA. I hadn't even considered that I'd be a college professor. Like that was just not a thing. None of the women in my family, aunties, none of those folks were professional women. They were all working class women. And in undergrad, I only had one Black professor ever who I essentially made her my mentor, but I still didn't really think I'd be following in her footsteps. But again, I got to Howard and they said, oh, you have a bachelor's degree in English. You could teach the developmental writing classes. And I went there and did the interview and got the job. And that is really where my teaching career started as a TA for the Center for Academic Reinforcement the first year. And then the second year, I applied to be in the School of Communication, because that's where I was getting my master's in mass communication. And they were phenomenal. I mean, I just learned so much about being a professor, because once I got over to the School of Communication, they had workshops about teaching and being a professor and what it means to be a professor, a Black professor, and what that means when you're in predominantly white settings as well. So they really, really prepared those of us who were TAs. And most of us who were in that program together essentially all went on to professions in higher education. And so I took a break in between getting the master's degree and getting the PhD because I got a full-time teaching position. It was a 3-year contract at James Madison University. So that became my first real teaching experience, like not a TA, but a real, this is your class, you're a professor. Mm-hmm. And, that was just a really, really interesting experience, going from being a TA at an HBCU to being a professor at a predominantly white school in rural Virginia, Harrisonburg, Virginia, where Confederate flags were everywhere. This was 1995. I was all of 25 years old and I was the professor. So that was just crazy, because for a lot of the students, they had a really hard time accepting that this young Black woman is their professor. And so I did that for 3 years and went home for a year and taught at Mount Holyoke College. And then I was ready to go back and get in a PhD program. And I applied a few places, but at the end of the day, I decided to go back to Howard for my PhD, because it was just comfort for me. It was just, it was just going back home and going to be back with the professors who had helped me so much in my growth. And so that's what I did.
Awesome. And our theme is women telling their stories, and Dr. Allison is telling her story. So, and it's interestingly enough, I didn't teach on that level. I taught on the elementary school level and prepared children to come to college with, pre-college programs. And I went to University of Bridgeport, so we both got our undergrads in Connecticut.
Okay. I remember going to University of Bridgeport sometime to party. We went there for a Mike Tyson fight one time where somebody had pay-per-view or whatever. They had access at University of Bridgeport. So we went from, it's what, I don't know, 35, 40-minute drive or something. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not far. It's not far. Ask me how I know. It's not far. So as we get into this piece about women telling their stories and your tremendous background in Africana studies and hip hop culture, movies, what are some exceptional examples of this theme, women in media telling our stories?
Right. Wow, that's a good question. So there are just many women that I admire who are women in media. And it's funny because, you know, I've been teaching for, I don't know now, 25, 26 years as a college professor, but that original dream of being a writer stayed there. And so I'm just getting back into that with, you know, the novel I'm working on and the screenplay and all of that. But I so admire my contemporaries who had the courage to just, you know, go on out there to Hollywood or New York or wherever and do it early. And so, you know, I talk about Shonda Rhimes. I read her wonderful book that she put out about her experiences. And we're basically the same age. And how she kind of just went out there and had to grind at working. The stories that really fascinate me are those women who worked on, you know, in the writer's room where they were the only one. And they were trying to navigate those writers' rooms and get some content in there that really showed Black folks as the three-dimensional beings that we are. But they had, you know, they really had to push and struggle because they were usually the only one in the room. And, you know, the Maya Brock-Akil is another one who, you know, started off as just that lone writer in the writer's room on some behind the scenes on a sitcom or somewhere where commonly Black folks are, you know, we're a caricature, we're comic relief, we're always, you know, have to talk jive and walk a certain way and do those things. And to be in the room in those situations and really have to struggle to get your voice out there that, oh, like, that's not the way we would say that, or that's not what we would do, that kind of thing. Those for me are the exceptional stories. And you know, several of those women now are kind of in positions of a little bit more power where they are the you know, the one behind the scenes, the producers and those kind of things, where now they can make sure that there are more voices in the writer's room to be able to accurately tell those stories. But those stories to me are, you know, just fascinating and exceptional and brave.
Yeah. And I'm more familiar with Shonda Rhimes, and to see her growth, to see what she's done. Just, you know, whether you like or dislike a Bridgerton, right? To go from ABC,
right,
to Netflix,
right,
and to have the smash of the season,
right,
followed it up with all the tears about, oh, you know, Regé-Jean Page isn't coming back, and to still follow it up with the amazing success of Bridgerton 2. Right. And now with the story of Queen Charlotte coming out in a little over a month, right, and then Bridgerton the Third coming out, she's telling her stories her way, her life. Just seeing that, right, is an incredible story. But you touched on something that I want to come back to perhaps in another way. You talked about a person being, you know, and very often the only one, right? The only one. How does it benefit women of different nationalities and I'll put it that way. How does it benefit women of different nationalities to have an understanding, a real true understanding of what it means to be a Black woman, to be a woman from the African diaspora? What is the positive link in that?
Of being the only one, or
for women who are of a different background, perhaps, you know, in this context of this country, perhaps being of a European background, right? And then hearing the real stories of what it is to be a woman of African descent. How does it help them know our true stories?
Right. So I think that one of the ways that it helps them is some of the advantages that they have, they take for granted. And I feel like our stories often help them to see those disparities and see, you know, where I am is, you know, the professors are predominantly white women when I arrived. And there's a little bit more diversity now than when I arrived in 2004. But, you know, white women were predominant and they had, you know, positions of power in terms of, you know, union head, like president of the union and different things, a dean, those kind of things. And still, you know, we were seeing different complaints that they had about things. And sometimes we have to come along and give them a little more context. Like, oh, okay, you're bothered by that? Well, you need to understand this over here. And one of the things, for example, we had put out a document during 2020 and everything that unfolded. You know, those of us who are considered in the category of people of color, so Black and Latino and some of the Asian faculty, just created this document to let folks know some of our stories and some of the things that we go through as professionals in a predominantly white setting. And it turned out to be absolutely illuminating for a lot of our colleagues who were of that majority background, that, you know, some of them wrote to me and like, I didn't realize what you go through. I didn't know it was like this, etc. And so I think that the benefit is that for them, it's eye-opening, it's awakening. And they have the opportunity to learn about, you know, to kind of get out of their own little world and bubble and learn about others and the challenges that others face. You know, my mom used to always talk about, if I was complaining about something, there was always the comeback of, well, you know, there are people who have it way worse than you. And it almost makes you appreciate what you have.
Yeah.
So that I would say is one of the ways that it's helpful. Yeah.
I shared a story at a former place of employment when we were having these conversations not long after the murder of George Floyd. And I said, a light goes out, your blinker goes out on your car, you just drive to the service station and get it changed. For me, I call the service station so I can have direct proof that I was trying to get this readied.
Right.
I get in my car, I pray, I make sure that I am at least 2 miles beneath the speed limit.
Right.
And that every law that I know on the driving surface, I follow.
Right. Absolutely.
That's the difference between me and one of my European brothers and sisters going and having a light out on their car.
Absolutely.
That's part of our story.
Absolutely.
You know, and it is a hard truth sometimes for people to hear, but
They
you
gotta
know,
hear
they got,
it. They
if
gotta
there's
hear
going
it.
to be change, right? If
Right.
there's going to be
Exactly.
change, we have to
Exactly.
begin sometimes by telling these difficult portions of our stories.
Right. And
So,
that, yeah, and that's one of the things that people have asked me before, like, why don't you, go teach at an HBCU? Like, why do you stay at a PWI? And one of the things that I always think about is the importance of representation and having faculty that look like me at a PWI. And not just for our Black students. Of course, it's important for them to know that they have somebody to talk to know that there are goals that they can reach and all of those things, but also for the white students. I mean, I've had so many students tell me, you're the first Black teacher I ever had, like in my whole life, K through 12 included. And it's important for them to see that and for them to understand, because I talk to them about, the challenges that I face personally, the challenges of institutional racism and all of that. And at the end of the day, we'll never make any kind of inroads in racism in terms of, conquering it and all of that without white folks. Like they, like if they don't participate,
yeah,
it's not going to change. We can't change it.
right.
So
And
that
just
I feel like I'm helping that generation
yeah.
to be those folks who are going to be in positions where hopefully they can make some significant changes.
And the truth of the matter is your presence, just you standing in front of the classroom, the whiteboard, the whatever it is that you teach from, the lectern, is telling a story all in and of itself.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I want to turn to something that is, I think, a little controversial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all of it is controversial, but this in a different way. So reality television.
Mm-hmm.
Right, reality television. There are negative and positive and entertaining and, a whole host of viewpoints on reality television, as particularly Black women in reality television. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, I did a book a few years ago about Black women on reality TV, called it The New Sapphire. And I do not watch a whole lot of reality television, particularly reality television that is representative of Black women and Black people in general. Love and Hip Hop, Real Housewives of Atlanta. Like, I mean, that stuff, it just, one of the reasons it bothers me so much, and it does indeed bother me, is because that representation is often used to define all of us, right? Now, I understand the folks out there who say, oh, that's identity politics, saying that we have to behave a certain way, etc. But something that we tend to experience as Black people that others don't is that any kind of negative representation that is in media tends to be applied on all of us. And that's not necessarily the case. Like I've gone on speaking engagements where I've had someone ask, well, everybody is portrayed negatively on reality television. And in a lot of ways, that's true. Yes, you have the Real Housewives of Orange County and wherever else, and they're fighting and carrying on as well. However, historically, in terms of the negative portrayals of Black women, as either mammies or just the sapphire and the loud and the all of that kind of thing, that gets applied to all of us. When you see white women fighting and carrying on a reality show, that's not something that you go the next day to work and somebody thinks that you behave that way. That does happen to Black women, right? I've had experiences with that. When I started at James Madison University and had 3 weeks into it, and the secretary says to me, I'm so glad you don't have an attitude like I thought you were going to have. And, now what does that do? Where does that come from? Right? That comes from all these media portrayals that tell you this is how Black women are. And it doesn't matter if they have a master's degree or a PhD or whatever it might be, this is how they are. You say something wrong and the neck will start rolling, and that assumption is made. And so that's what that does to me with reality television. You've got the, women with these fabulous houses and cars and all of that, but you say the wrong thing and we're going to be scrapping on the floor, right? Like that kind of thing. So that's what really, really bugs me about it, because I feel like it sentences us all in a certain way, because just the mere fact that it's called reality television makes some believe that like that's something that's real, like that's how they are. And I understand that in media, I'm not saying that all portrayals of Black folks have to be positive and we have to be altruistic and all of that, but I do need people to understand that carries, those kinds of things follow us in the way that, if every portrayal of a Black man you see on TV is he's a thug and a criminal, and then, brother man's walking down the street with his suit on, getting ready to go to work in an office, and he gets stopped, that has an effect. Like, these things have an impact. And I think we don't talk about that enough in terms of how you see many of us get treated in our day-to-day lives. So much of that comes from assumptions in media, because it doesn't necessarily come from you have real world experience with Black folks, right? Like, what, for people who have no interaction with Black people, where do they get their ideas about Black people? They get it from some form of media. And so that is why it's just troubling to me to see some of these portrayals.
But I think you speak to something that is consistently damaging, and that is people coming to the table with the story already being told in their minds.
Exactly.
Right. And so you think that this is how these people are.
Right.
And so when you can see, and I had a perfect example of this going back to college. My first roommate was white. Our neighbors were white. One was Catholic, one was Jewish. One night, my roommate asked me, what religion are Black people? And I'm like, but our neighbors are both white, two different faiths. So why would you think, but
there's one religion for all Black people?
But this is a person, as you said, she went to school with one Black person.
Right.
From K through 12.
Right, exactly.
And so her experience was so limited, and she just didn't know how to ask in a more, she hadn't put the thought into it. And she also didn't think that that was an inappropriate way to get an answer to her question. Right. Exactly. And so having more people of color, as you said, in PWIs, predominantly white institutions, it becomes, okay, so I can, you force me to think that there might be a different story.
Right.
Because I know that you have to have a certain level of credential to do this job. And so, so now I can't think that, people of color, particularly those in the African diaspora, don't get their masters, don't get their PhDs, because we do. And we are actually graduating at a higher rate than almost anybody else.
Exactly.
So it is forcing the stories to be told in a different way because we're here.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
We're here. Exactly. And you have to, you have to make space. Part of you in your soul has to say, well, she's different and she's here.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got her beautiful natural twist out and not
Right.
And we could
Exactly.
get into the whole Crown Act and a whole nother interview, but
Absolutely.
I'll just stop right there and say, you're here. You know,
Absolutely. And
you're
it's
here.
important to see. And
Yeah.
I don't take that lightly. I don't take it for granted. You
Yeah.
know, that
Yeah.
the students, all of my students need to see and understand that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, to another one of your lanes, the music industry, particularly hip hop, and Jersey's own Queen Latifah, Jersey's own Lauryn Hill,
Yes.
both Brick City products, right?
Yes.
Um, what do you think about? And those are Jersey's own. There are more, but those are Jersey's own. And shout out to Englewood, New Jersey, where controversial or not, that's where Rappers Delight came from.
Right,
So,
right,
okay.
right.
So Master G and I were in high school together. So just saying, he was a paper boy on my street. Just saying, right? So, but Queen Latifah, Lauryn Hill, and many others that come out of New Jersey that have amazing voices. Going back to Dionne Warwick, product of New Jersey, but to be in the hip hop generation of people who are still relevant. I was
Yeah, yeah,
literally
yeah.
at an event yesterday, and during our writing time, the person facilitating played music from the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So, because you
Yeah,
can't, I mean, you can't ignore her. You just can't ignore her.
absolutely.
What do you think about the stories being told about hip hop and women in the industry? Tell us, what your thoughts are. Any artists that you would say they're telling the truth about this person, or they're making up stuff. How could I forget Whitney Houston? God bless her memory.
Right.
And in my own homie Bernard Bell, but not a woman, but Bernard
Mm.
Bell from Englewood, New Jersey. His
Right.
sister Regina Bell,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
from New
Yeah.
Jersey. Tell us
Yeah.
about those stories. Where do you see hip hop these days? Where do you see women in hip hop? Give us some more background on that.
Yeah, so we, the last couple of weeks I've been talking about this with my students. So I teach intro to hip hop culture, and I created that class at Stockton. I got here in 2004, so by 2006 I was offering this class because I felt like, one of the things that I love about what is it, Generation X, I guess, is that generation, um is that, I grew up in the middle. So I have my older siblings who were listening to, the OJs and Ashford and Simpson and Kool and the Gang, Teddy Pendergrass, like all of that. I love all of that as well. And then hip hop comes along, and my brother and I, who were on the younger end, gravitated towards that. And because it was a voice of the young generation, and it was taking this creativity with words and setting it to music, following in the footsteps of our, revolutionary poets of the generation before in the 60s, and adding another flair to it. And so that's the thing that I love about hip hop. And I thought, those of us who grew up with it, who are now coming of age and become, college professors or wherever we are. I remember when, I think it was like Hakeem Jeffries who quoted Jay-Z on the Senate floor. But, it's like, yes, that's my generation. We are now in these positions where we can demonstrate, what is it about hip hop? Like, why is this thing still around? Why is it 50 years old? Why is it so special? And so that ability to really talk about something and do it in a creative way, I explain that to my students, that it is similar to the African griots. Like, that's what they did. They told stories, but they used rhythm and music, and they're telling our truths. They are telling our truth. They're telling our history, our customs and all of that, but in a linguistically creative way.
Yes.
And so that's what I love about that. And so when you talk specifically about women in hip hop and being able to, in the early days, I was telling my students this just last week, you had these women who were like, the main thing you had to be able to do was go toe to toe with the boys, right? So you had MC Light, you had Roxanne Shante. It was about battle rapping. It was about, all right, let me stand up here and let me see what you got.
Pause there for a second. Pause there for a second. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So I watched the documentary on PBS, and when she said that this judge gave her a 4.
Oh, right. I know.
I just
exactly.
For those who haven't seen it, first of all, please go to PBS and watch the documentary. But she was in this battle, and everybody was giving her 10. She had gotten to the last piece. And this judge said, as a woman, you can't represent hip hop.
Can't win. Right.
You can't win.
Exactly.
And gave her a 4, knowing that she deserved the 10.
Exactly. Knowing that she was better.
Right.
So it has been an uphill battle for women in hip hop. And unfortunately, when that shift came in the 90s, where it became more about your sexuality and how you look and all of that, then that just, sadly, it really, kind of shifted the narrative for women. Like, you had to talk about your sexual prowess, and you had to, be half naked on the album covers and all. Like, that wasn't how it was, for the MC Light and Queen Latifah, Moni Love, and all of those folks. Right. And then when, Little Kim and Foxy Brown come along, it all shifts. And so a lot of the young ladies who came after that in the early 2000s just followed that formula, because it was like, all right, well, this is what record labels want, and so we need to do this, even if that wasn't what they wanted to do. And so one of the kind of the troubling things about just the music industry in general is that, and this is true for men as well, because, I talk to my students about representations of masculinity in hip hop, and that you're expected to be a particular way in order to make it in the industry. Now, I'm hoping that that's changing, because there are some young ladies out here who do have a lot to say, and they're not stripping down naked in order to say it. And No Name is one young lady in hip hop who's really got a lot to say, and she's a very, very intelligent young lady. But then you wonder, like, she's not as big as a name as a Meg Thee Stallion, because she's not doing all of that. So you kind of wonder how much is changing, and when is that really going to happen, where these young ladies can just have their voice without having to show everything in order to, be heard.
Right.
So that's something that kind of concerns me in terms of the future of hip hop. But I know that these young ladies are out there who really do have a lot to say. And because of social media, there are more ways in order to say it. Like, you don't just have to be like, okay, I have to get a record deal in order to get out there. Because with social media, that's no longer the case. So you do have that element of it.
Well, I see that I could go on, so I got 3 more questions, and I'm going to let you get out of here. So as in your role as chair of Africana Studies program, what do you think your greatest achievement is as it pertains to women?
Again, I think it's about its representation, for one, as, being the chair of Africana Studies. And for students to see that and understand that that's representation. Yeah. And also, I'm educating my students about women that they've never heard of. Like, there are so many Black women who have done amazing things. And in K through 12, my students, one of the main things that they consistently say is, how come we never learned this stuff before, right? So they get in my classes and they're bothered by the fact that they never learned this stuff before. And in fact, it's funny because, you have the right wingers who are trying to get rid of Black studies and all that stuff, and they're, oh, no CRT and all this. And one of their arguments that they've made is, well, because, you know, it can vilify white students or make them feel bad, et cetera, et cetera. But in my experience with the white students who take my classes, more often than not, they're bothered by the fact that they never learned this stuff before. They're not, oh, woe is me, feeling bad about themselves. They're thinking, this is nuts that I didn't learn this stuff before. Why was this information kept from me? And so they are fascinated by all of the stories and all of the women out there that they've never heard of. So yes, Black History Month, K through 12. Yeah, we know Harriet Tubman and we know Rosa Parks, right? And maybe they learned about Sojourner Truth, but that's, you know, that's iffy.
The fringes.
Right. But, you know, for them to learn about Claudette Colvin and learn about, you know, the so many women that were behind the scenes for the civil rights movement, who essentially, like, the Montgomery bus boycott and all the different protests that they had would have never happened without people like Diane Nash, and, you know, and there's just so many that they learn about in my class that they're like, they're, you know, blown away.
Mind's blown. Mind's blown.
Fannie Lou Hamer is another big one that we talk about at Stockton. We actually have a whole annual symposium named in honor of Fannie Lou Hamer, by virtue of the fact that we're so close to Atlantic City and where she spoke in 1964. So we have this whole conference, and, you know, we essentially say, like, as a student, you can't come to Stockton and graduate and never heard of Fannie Lou Hamer, right? So it's like, there's just so many of these amazing women who had, you know, had it 2, 3, 4 times as hard as others, because they're women and they're Black, and the mountains that they had to climb, students need to learn about that. And that's one of the goals in terms of my role, is making sure that they do, and making sure that they understand all of these contributions of women they learn about Sarah Spencer Washington, another one who just a mogul who came, that's New Jersey right there, and had a whole factory in Atlantic City, you know, teaching women about hair care and all of that. So there's quite a bit that I feel like I'm responsible to give to them and impart to the students.
So let me ask you, you have a young woman who has opportunity, been given an opportunity of, you know, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a television show. And she says, Dr. Allison, how do I tell my story in this role? What are some principles, some guiding principles that you might share with her?
Well, you know, first of all, there's so many ways these days to tell your story, right? You know, again, we have social media, we have the ability to get our voices out there in ways that weren't possible 15, 20 years ago. So, you know, I would tell them to, you know, start writing these things down. Journaling is fantastic way to get these things down. These days you have podcasting, you have, you know, all of those ways that you can get your story out there. But I would also tell them, like, your story is your story. So don't ever think, oh, like, nobody wants to hear this, or it's not unique enough, because all of us have this unique journey that we have walked. And so I would encourage them to tell it, to write it down, to voice it, and, you know, to find positive ways to share it. I stress that too, because, you know, sometimes people get caught up and there's like negative ways that it's getting put out there. But in terms of finding positive ways to share it, find open mics, find different ways that you can start going to places and events. Like I go to writing events, and that is it's always so inspiring, enriching for me. They have a great writers conference at Medgar Evers College in New York. That the first time I went there, I was just like, oh my God, I just love this, because it was just Black writers, and they're telling you about, and all forms of writing, poetry and novels and screenwriting, all that. And one of the first writing groups that I got involved in because I went to that writers conference, and then met someone, reached out to that person, and he was like, oh, we meet and we have these sessions where you can share your writing and get feedback. So also doing things like that, and kind of connecting with other people who kind of do the things that you're interested in doing, that also helps you, because it helps you to hone your craft, and helps you in telling your story as well.
Okay. Last question. You got a wand, you got direct line, you know that this is going to be answered.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to see change in the depiction of African women in media?
The main thing I want to see is more three-dimensional characters. Move away from this assumption that we are all this particular way, that we're all strong. That this notion of strong Black woman, oh, she's a strong Black, like that's not necessarily the case for all of us. That some of us are vulnerable, and some of us are quiet, and some, the wealth of depictions. There should, just like there's a wealth of depictions of white women, there should be a wealth of depictions of Black women, to demonstrate that we are not all cookie cutter in the same way. And so I would love to see more Black women behind the camera telling these stories, because that helps to shape that and bring about the well-roundedness of our stories, if you have more of us in there being able to tell these stories. And so I think that that's the main thing that I would want to see happen. I love when I see, I try to consume whenever I know that there's something coming out, particularly if I know that it is a Black woman writer or director, or something like that. I check it out, because I want to give it the benefit of the doubt. And I have been excited to see more stories being told, and I'm hoping that will continue. Kerry Washington just had that Unprisoned story.
Yes.
It's on
Hulu.
And I just watched it, and I was like, okay, like this is what we need to see. We need to see more varied depictions. Like her character is different than what you normally see, like on other kinds of shows. And the way that they're telling the stories, they're dealing with, they're putting comedy in there, but they're also dealing with the system and how difficult it is when you come out of prison to acclimate into life. They're showing the people who are impacted by that, the people who, your family that got left behind. They're showing a lot of dimensions, and that's what I want to see. It's just more dimensions of us.
Yeah. Wow. Dr. Allison, thank you, and thank you. We could probably have a 5-part series on this and still need some more. But I want to thank you for coming on and sharing with us about and celebrating women who tell their stories, and giving us some nuanced views, some very pointed views and illustrations of women and the variety of backgrounds and careers. Your own career, your own story is a joy to hear about, and an example of, hey, we are 3, 4, even 5-dimensional. So don't pigeonhole any of us. And
Absolutely.
for all of you that are here, that are hearing the story about Women's History Month, look up one of these women that you didn't know about that Dr. Allison mentioned and find out the beautiful story, the challenge of the story, and the victories that have come, because most certainly they are there. So from the Central Jersey Club, from Malia Bloom, we thank you, Dr. Allison. We thank you, audience. We would love to hear from you and share with us your thoughts about this, your questions, everything. We're excited. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.